First Nephi chapter 1 verse 4, and there's actually quite a bit to unwrap in this longer verse. It says, "For it came to pass in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah, my father Lehi having dwelt at Jerusalem in all his days, and in that same year there came many prophets prophesying unto the people that they must repent, or the great city Jerusalem must be destroyed." So we're going to talk about a variety of different things here and how this could have really tripped up anybody that was trying to imitate or create a forged document similar to the Book of Mormon, and did only the opposite in the Book of Mormon. First of all, Nephi dates this book. For non-believers in the Book of Mormon, you could say Joseph Smith dates this book. And so they date it in the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. So was Zedekiah a person? Was he actually a king of Judah? Yeah, this is one of the very few ties we have back to the Bible. We read about Zedekiah in the Book of Kings. We know that he was the son of Josiah, and he was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So everything we know about Zedekiah, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a few slides, but essentially Zedekiah was appointed king of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, who Jerusalem had become a vassal state to Babylon and was paying heavy taxes to. Although they were taxing Judah heavily, they would still allow Judah to be able to practice their religion and keep somewhat their local government intact. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar even appointed Zedekiah to be king, as Zedekiah was of the lineage of David. So he kind of picked and chose from the options that he had to keep kind of the peace among the people in Jerusalem, but he chose Zedekiah because he knew Zedekiah would do pretty much anything Nebuchadnezzar said. Originally, his name was Mattanyahu or Mattaniah, but King Nebuchadnezzar changed his name to Zedekiah, almost as a mark like, I own you, you're mine, I'm going to call you Zedekiah. And so his name was changed to Zedekiah. He took over king at only age 21, so he was very young, and there was a lot going on at the time that he took over. But the details that we get from the Bible are pretty limited. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out here is we know the years that King Zedekiah reigned. We're pretty certain that it was 598 BC that he took over. And so by saying this took place in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah, the Book of Mormon dates itself exactly. So everything can be built off of that date. And so we can map out chronologically almost exactly when the Book of Mormon took place. Now, if you were creating a document like the Book of Mormon, you were trying to deceive millions of people into believing that this was an actual historical document. If you did put the date, how easy would it have been to say something like in 598 BC? But in 598 BC, that term didn't exist. BC didn't exist in the day that Nephi was writing this document. Second, why would you even be so specific as to the date? If it was me, I would try to be super vague and try to just keep it as obscure as possible so people couldn't find any what we call anachronisms. If you're going to date it, I would have kept it vague personally, but he gives us the exact date of the beginning of the Book of Mormon, and everything builds off of that point. So an anachronism is something that falls out of place in history, that doesn't work in terms of a timeline. So by giving us a date, he sets himself up for any type of anachronism, anything that's out of date. He mentions any type of tool that didn't exist, any type of plant or animal that wasn't discovered, or anything that was going on in local politics or government that hadn't happened yet or had already happened. It has to be perfectly historically accurate from this point forward, or it'd be very easy to throw the Book of Mormon out as a forgery. And it's so hard to write a fictional book without including any anachronisms. If you Google it, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of anachronisms in the most famous works of literature, of movies and TVs. These are just a couple that I wanted to point out. Back to the Future, Marty McFly, in 1955, he had a Gibson ES 345 guitar that didn't come out till 1958. Forrest Gump, he made an investment in Apple in 1975, but Apple didn't go public until 1980. Literary examples: William Shakespeare, he made mention of a ticking clock, but mechanical clocks hadn't even been invented at the time of Julius Caesar. I threw Mark Twain in here because he was such a outspoken about how sloppy of writing the Book of Mormon was, when it contains no anachronisms, and Mark Twain himself contained an anachronism in The Prince and the Pauper. These are, regarded as two of the greatest writers in history, and neither of them could get through their careers without anachronisms. Joseph Smith, however, was able to supposedly create a fictional document that had 464 pages of transcript in 85 days, and do that without any anachronisms. William Shakespeare, Mark Twain, these people that document these videos, write these movies and TV shows, these are the best writers in the whole country, the whole world, really, and they work on these things for years and years and years, and still can't put together a work that doesn't contain an anachronism. Joseph Smith was able to do it in just 85 days on his own in 464 pages. I mean, the likelihood that he was able to do that without any anachronisms, very, very low. Very, very low percentage that he would ever be able to do that. And by dating it, we have something to check it against. So personally, if you're out there and you're trying to come up with a forged document that contains historical information, don't be so specific as to the date, because it's going to set you up for failure. Obviously, this lends to the idea that this was exactly what Joseph Smith said it was, that it was a work of God and an actual historical document. Okay, second part of the verse. In that same year there came prophets prophesying unto the people that they must repent, or the great city Jerusalem must be destroyed. Remember, one of the questions that Joseph asked his wife, who knew him better than anyone in the world and thought this to be a genuine question, was, did the city of Jerusalem have walls around it? He didn't even know that Jerusalem had walls around it, much less that Zedekiah was a king in Jerusalem, and that took place in a time when there was many prophets that were prophesying among the people. So in the Bible, we read about a variety of prophets that lived at this time, including Zephaniah, Nahum, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Huldah, which is a prophetess, Uriah, which we'll talk about a little bit more, Daniel, Ezekiel, and Obadiah. So these are just the ones that are named. There could be more or less. In fact, we have read of more in some of the documents that have been found since. But why were there so many prophets in Jerusalem at the time? Now, this is rare, right? In the Bible, we don't read about Moses and the 10 other prophets that were also trying to free the children of Israel. We don't read about Abraham and the 10 other prophets that were trying to teach their children to live according to the covenant. But in this time period, we see all these prophets that were prophesying, trying to save Jerusalem. Now, what were they trying to save Jerusalem for? Why was the city of Jerusalem going to be destroyed, that we read? Well, we know very limited from the Bible. From history, we know they were eventually overcome by the Babylonian Empire. We know that they had become a vassal state to Babylon, but it wasn't until 1935 that the Lachish Letters were discovered and filled in all the gaps. The Lachish Letters told the story of Uriah, who was a prophet that we read about in the Bible, who escaped to Egypt, was extradited back to Jerusalem, and killed by the local government in Jerusalem. Now, why was Uriah killed? Because he was teaching the same things that all the prophets on the previous screen were teaching, as well as Lehi. They were all teaching that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, the Babylonian Empire, if they continued to be wicked, and if Zedekiah decided to make an alliance with Egypt. So that's what was going on at the time. We learned this from the Lachish Letters, that we have these kind of two world powers and a third world power even to the north in the Assyrian Empire, but we have this Eastern Babylonian Empire that's trying to take over the world, and we have Egypt that's long been a staple over in the west. So obviously Jerusalem was surrounded by Babylon and was a vassal state to Babylon, but much of their economy relied on Egypt. They were having to pay Babylon all the money that they made trading with Egypt. Egypt had a lot of money and a lot of power, maybe not as strong as a military, but they had all sorts of statues and gold and jewels, and they loved the finer things in life, and that must have been very attractive to a lot of the people in Jerusalem, and that's what created a great trade environment between Egypt and Jerusalem, as they would trade incense and resources with Egypt all the time. It even kind of lends to the idea that Lehi probably was well acquainted with Egypt, and much of his wealth would have come from trading with Egypt, and much of his knowledge of Egyptian writing and language would have been taught to his sons so that they could communicate and do business with Egypt. And so Laman and Lemuel, reaping the benefits of the business relationship that Jerusalem had with Egypt and living among the wealth, they obviously sided with a lot of the politicians at the time who also had that same mindset that, hey, we're making money on this partnership with Egypt. If we form an alliance with Egypt, maybe we can be strong enough to withstand Babylon. We won't have to pay them anymore, and we'll be rich and happy. That was the prevailing theme among a lot of the elites in Jerusalem. But these prophets knew better and said, don't align yourself with Egypt. Don't align yourself with Egypt. Just stay the course with Babylon, try to repent, and that's their only chance of not being destroyed. If we go with Egypt, we're definitely going to be destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. And so all these prophets were saying that same thing. This is one of the things that Lehi was saying, and the government, Jerusalem, did not like that idea that this was going to happen. King Zedekiah, foremost among them, even though he had been appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, he had experienced the riches that come from Egypt, and he knew that the time was short-lived of them being able to pay these high taxes to Babylon. So he loved the idea of joining Egypt and rebelling against Babylon. He didn't like anything the prophets were saying. That's what we learned from the Lachish Letters, that they accused Uriah of causing disturbance among the people and treason for going against the government, and had him extradited back from Egypt when he tried to run away and killed. And that we see we'll see in the next few verses of the Book of Mormon that's exactly what they tried to do to Lehi. And it made sense that he had to get out of there, not only because Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, but because the government and the main political party of the day in Jerusalem didn't want anything to do with people that were not for the rebellion against Babylon, that were trying to stay the course and get people to repent and live according to the covenant within their vassal state. So this is what's going on politically at the time. We learned all this from the Lachish Letters, and we didn't discover the Lachish Letters until 1935. This is over 100 years after the Book of Mormon was written. We finally fill in all the gaps, and it could have been very easy for the Book of Mormon to be wrong on any point when we fill in the gaps of actual history. But like has been said before, the Book of Mormon gets better with age. The more we learn about history, the more relevant and true the Book of Mormon becomes, and the more it fits perfectly into the history of